It's Kylie here. Sorry, I'm just getting set up, but I am going to go live and do an April Q&A. Happy April 1st, April Fool's Day. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer some of your questions. I'm just sorry, I'm getting set up on Instagram as well. So just give me a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to answer questions that have come from the Sleep Deprived Mamas group, my Facebook community. So yeah, we're going to get started. We're going to talk a little bit about toddler sleep, it looks like. We're going to talk about feeding and also about tongue ties. So I'm just going to start off from the top and work my way down. So Amanda Jean has a toddler who will be 2 that started to sleep through the night at the end of January. He takes over an hour to fall asleep, great bedtime routine, wakes up on his own at 7:30, naps from 12:30 to 1:45 or 2:15. Then he's in bed by 7:40 every night, but he won't fall asleep until close to 9. It sounds like bedtime is a big fight. Okay, so let's just see. I had some responses that I was making there. So one of the things that I had recommended was that if you could start the bedtime routine and do all of the things in the routine and then quietly go into his room until you're kind of following those sleep cues. And then you kind of do the whole, like the 3 last steps of bedtime, for example, so that you're not fighting the bedtime, like the actual going to sleep part. The other thing too is try to cap that nap. So sometimes what happens with our toddlers, and especially our older toddlers, is that if they nap for too long, it often does lead to a later bedtime, because they have now had too much of a reduction in that sleep pressure in the middle of the day, and then they have to build that sleep pressure up again in order to be tired enough to fall asleep. And so you can either change your bedtime routine from 7:40 to a little bit later so that you know that he's falling asleep at 9, so that you can then just keep that nap the way it is, from 12:30 to 1:45 or 2:15, and then assume that he's going to fall asleep closer to 9. And so then you're actually starting bedtime a little bit later so that you don't have that battle. But also you can try capping that nap a little bit if you do want that 7:40 bedtime. So it's kind of playing around to see what's going to work best for your family, but also what's going to work best for your baby. So doing that. The other suggestions that I had within the group was really making sure that you're getting some physical activity in the evenings before bedtime, about 60-ish minutes before bedtime, so that you have time to wind things down as well. But really some really nice physical play. So think like obstacle courses in the living room, take the pillows off the couch, do some of that rough and tumble play, and then also help him to just kind of ground and calm going into the bedtime routine. Let's just see. Okay, so actually Amanda mentioned that it had been 3 days of trying a shorter nap, so from 12:30 to 1:30, and now he's falling asleep very fast the past 2 nights, in bedroom by 7:40, no fighting, and asleep by 8. So amazing, which is always really exciting for me to hear when I give some strategies. Mamas put those into practice, and they work beautifully. And oftentimes it's like that, but sometimes you kind of have to tweak different things. Okay, so Gabriella had a question about feeding. So her 9-month-old and is very constipated, I guess. So she's exclusively breastfed. She's doing solids. They're doing baby-led weaning. They are no dairy or gluten, and things are improving. But still, she has a question about what foods to offer, which ones to avoid. Is it a sign that maybe she's not ready for some foods? So this is a difficult one because there's a lot of reasons for constipation. If you're noticing more constipation with certain types of foods, that might be something to start keeping track of. And then obviously not offering those, because definitely we're still having a somewhat immature digestive system at 9 months. And babies don't actually have all of their digestive enzymes until they're closer to 2, until they are closer to having all of their sort of baby teeth in. Especially the enzymes that they don't have quite until later on is the enzymes that are needed for breaking down complex carbs. So things like grains, rices, oatmeals, all of those things, which is interesting because usually those are the first foods that your baby market is trying to sell you. All of those baby rice cereals and everything, right? So those actually often do lead to constipation because baby just doesn't have the proper enzymes to be digesting those. So that might be part of it. The other part of constipation is it could be related to tightness that's going on in the body. So really making sure that things are, I don't know if you've gotten any body work done, but that things are sort of released and flexible. If your baby has any tightness, especially in the front of their body, oftentimes tightness around the diaphragm, around the belly area, that can also lead to constipation. The other thing is really looking at oral motor function. So I love that you're doing the baby led weaning. I don't know if you've noticed any difficulty with certain types of foods that maybe require a little bit more managing and manipulating in the mouth, or if you've had any difficulties with breastfeeding, but looking at the oral motor function. So if the tongue is not doing what it's supposed to do and moving the food to various parts of the mouth, especially to those back molars to kind of chomp and break down the food properly, then baby is actually swallowing bigger pieces of food, and that digestive process is not happening in the same way, which starts in the mouth. And that peristaltic movement that moves the food through the body, through the colon, through the intestines, all of that stuff out the other end, that starts in the mouth. And that peristaltic movement doesn't happen properly if we're not getting that nice tongue action either. So that might be something that is going on, but I guess I would ask, is this constipation something that has been going on for a while, or did it just start when you started solids? There's lots of questions here because it might be something that you're eating in your diet that maybe baby doesn't love. Dairy and gluten are generally the top 5, but other things that are in those top 5 are things like eggs, corn, eggs, corn, dairy, gluten, and soy. Soy is the 5th one. And then after that is things like tree nuts and all of that. So hopefully that helps, Gabriella, but feel free to ask more questions within the group. Maria Helena asked or said that her 11-month-old baby is skipping naps. It's been mostly 1 nap per day instead of 2 since starting daycare, and today no nap at daycare. Okay. Baby's also teething, but they're worried about getting back on track with the 2 naps. So this is really interesting. Around that 11-12 month mark, babies often do go through a phase or a period where usually they've been on 2 naps and then they start to fight one of those naps. It's a very common phase, and it's often the time that parents are like, oh, I guess my baby is ready just for 1 nap a day, which is not quite true because your baby's not quite ready for those super long times awake. They'll often get into that sort of overtiredness state pretty easily. So what I would suggest is actually capping that first nap of the day so that you can get the second nap. So capping that first nap means that you're going to have a slightly longer wake time in between. You might even have to push that second nap a little bit later in order to make it easier to get. So capping that first nap and then sort of playing around with extending that wake time in between nap 1 and nap 2. And then trying for that second nap sort of even sometimes later in that afternoon, just to get through to bedtime. The thing with daycare, this is definitely tough. But daycare is a transition and it's new, it's unfamiliar, it's predictable. There's lots of extra stimulation. So baby is already in a little bit more of that stress state and their cortisol is running high. So it's going to be harder to fall asleep and to calm. And they're getting ready or they're sort of learning and practicing and getting used to the transition. So often it does take a few weeks for those naps to kind of equal out. But what I would suggest to the daycare, if there is flexibility, I would suggest that they do offer that first nap in the morning still and then try offering that second nap. If they can't get that first nap, then I would offer that nap in the middle of the day. or at least a rest period. And what I mean by a rest period is just a period where we're not forcing baby to sleep, because we can't force anybody to sleep, but we're offering a situation that has less stimulation. So it's dark or dimly lit room. Maybe there's some quiet music playing at daycare. They often do that, or they have the sound machine going. Maybe we're just resting on the bed looking at some, or I don't know if at 11 months they're still in the crib, probably. So resting in the crib, maybe looking at some books or playing with some quiet toys, or maybe they're sitting quietly with one of the daycare providers doing that. So that's definitely something to try. And then during the weekends when your baby is home with you, I would still offer those 2 naps, playing around with the timing. So it's not that you're doing anything wrong in terms of how you're putting a baby down. It's really just um, it's this transition period, and it's very, very normal also, not only with the transition to daycare, but also around this 11 to 12-month mark in terms of development, which is also playing into this fighting of the nap during the day. So persevere, offer the 2 naps. If you can't get that first nap, then offer that nap in the middle of the day and try for the 2 naps the next day. Your baby will get through this phase and will still be very happy with 2 naps for the most part until 14 to 16 months. So hopefully that helps, Maria Helena. But if you want to ask more questions, you can feel free to do that inside the group. Monica has the next question. And she mentioned that both of her boys have oral ties. Her oldest is almost 2. Her youngest is 5.5 months old. She's getting her oldest evaluated this summer, and her youngest is seeing speech therapists now and doing stretches to determine if the ties need to be released or not. Both boys have had pretty significant reflux, bottle feeding is fine, and they're messy. Okay, she's like, I don't really know what I'm asking. Maybe it's all related. Overall body tightness, torticollis, reflux, oral ties, sleep issues. Yes, all of that is related. It's sort of the chicken and the egg, right? Oftentimes what happens is that actually the oral ties often are what are happening first, because the tongue function and the tongue dissociation in utero happens quite early on. And if the tongue is tight, or the frenulum under the tongue, or that tongue, what happens in utero is that the tongue basically and the floor of the mouth kind of develop together. And then gradually there's something called apoptosis. And that means that there's like cell death that then allows that portion under here to kind of die away, so that we just have that little frenulum, which is like that string, quote unquote string. It's actually a piece of fascia and mucosa and sometimes muscle, but that kind of stays in order to help anchor that tongue to the floor of our mouth. But it's anchored with enough range of motion laterally and up and down and out and in. And when that apoptosis does not happen, this is one of the theories, when that does not happen properly, and that frenulum under the tongue is too tight or too short or too thick, then that means that the tongue is not actually able to move the way it should be moving. So this happens in utero. So if the tongue, and the tongue is really almost the beginning of development for everything else. And so if the tongue is not moving, then most likely your baby is also not going to be moving in the same kind of unrestricted ways in utero, which means that they might actually then have different areas of tightness in utero. They might get stuck in different positions. They are just not moving as freely, which can then lead to body tightness over time, can also lead to things like torticollis over time. But also then once they're born, right? So then they still have all of that body tightness because they're not moving as freely, or they're just moving one way, but not the other, depending on what's going on with the tongue usually. Then after, when they're born, if that tongue is not working properly, then at the breast and also at the bottle, they're not going to get a good latch. They're not going to get a good seal on the breast or bottle nipple. They're not going to be able to cup that tongue and push that, cup that nipple and push that nipple up to the roof of their mouth and really get that nice vacuum seal. And they're going to have air leaking in, or they're going to be pulling on and off and have air leaking in. And often that is the sort of first major cause of reflux is that increased air intake. There's also, of course, body tightness then just makes feeding more uncomfortable because of different ways that we're holding baby, and maybe they're not comfortable and they're kind of squirming, and then that's affecting the latch as well. So those go hand in hand. And then the sleep issues So this is a whole other bag of things, but also can be related. So if your baby is mouth breathing, snoring, a noisy breather, then that could be because of the tongue being in a low resting tongue posture and actually being down instead of where technically it should be up on the palate. So um, our oral rest posture, optimal rest posture, oral rest posture, when we're awake and not talking or eating or drinking or any of that stuff, and also when we're asleep, should actually be lips closed and tongue resting just gently behind the front gums, and sort of up on the palate, just like gently. And often babies that have those tongue ties, those oral ties, don't have that. And they're actually sleeping with their mouth open, which can then lead to difficulties with sleep because with our mouth open, we're not actually getting proper oxygenation, which happens through our mouth and the filtration of all the bacteria. Open mouth breathing can also lead to things like increased or enlarged adenoids, enlarged tonsils. We're also not necessarily getting into that sort of parasympathetic rest and digest mode of relaxation, and then that also leads to things like not getting into that super deep restorative sleep, um, because as a mouth breather you're actually breathing more from your chest, so it's going to be shallower breaths as well. So 100% that can lead to sleep issues. If you haven't watched my videos on my tongue tie journey with my kids, then I'll see if I can link those to the video inside my group, but those are also on my YouTube channel. So that would be helpful to go and watch as well. But yes, all of them are connected. Oftentimes getting some body work done for your baby can make a lot of difference and positive difference. And then also be able to see whether that oral tie needs to be released right away. There's a lot of really nice effects that body work can do. And maybe you don't have to release the ties. So a tongue tie is only a tongue tie if it's causing functional issues. And so that means like what it looks like, but also what it does. So, what is the range of motion? What is the strength? What's going on? But also, you have had significant reflux issues. You have had sleep issues. You have body tightness, right? So, all of those things are also functional issues. So, those things need to be considered along with these stretches that your speech therapist is doing. I think that that's great that your speech therapist is doing some stretches. What she's doing probably is actually retraining that tongue to start working a little more to see how much range of motion can we get, because that's a super important component of doing any kind of tongue tie releases or anything like that. So if we release that frenulum, that tongue doesn't know what to do. So we need to reteach it. We need to rehab it. Just like if you got a knee surgery, you would have to rehab your knee. You have to rehab the tongue also in order to teach it and strengthen it, teach it what movements to do, and also strengthen that, right? So that it has full function. And that's a big piece of the puzzle that is often missing. But that's probably what your speech therapist is doing. So, Monica, hopefully that helped. Laura, okay, so she has a 33-month-old who's suddenly not wanting to nap, only napping 1 to 1.5 hours, down from 2 to 2.5 hours. Wake time is usually 6:15 to 6:30. Nap is 1 to 3, and bedtime is 8:45 till 9. She's lower to mid sleep needs. Since the nap has messed up, she's not sleeping through the night anymore. What schedule should we try? She contact naps but goes down at night easily. Okay, so there's a lot here. First of all, your baby is getting older. So they're going to, as they get older, they're going to need, or your toddler, sorry, as they get older, they're going to need less and less sleep, especially if they're a low to mid sleep needs baby. She is getting, let's say, 8:45, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, like 10 hours at night plus 2 hours during the day, 12 hours in a 24-hour period. Maybe that's too much for her. And so maybe at 33 months, now she's getting to an age where she doesn't need as much sleep. Maybe she needs to have that nap only be an hour to an hour and a half. There's nothing wrong with an hour to an hour and a half nap. Now, I want to say that the best way to know if your baby is having a good quote unquote good nap is to really go based on their mood when they wake up from that nap. Are they happy and content? That's all they needed. It doesn't matter how long it was, if it was 30 minutes or 2 hours. The sleep training culture out there wants you to think that your baby should be having 2 hour long naps in order to have those be restorative. But there is no research out there that naps are restorative after a certain length of time. realistically. And the purpose of naps is not that we want them to be quote unquote restorative. It's that we want to decrease that sleep pressure so your baby can stay calm and content and happy when they're awake, and also decrease that sleep pressure so that they're not overtired, which leads to crankiness and increased cortisol and then more difficulties with sleeping. So I would play around with that nap. If she's napping 1 to 1.5 hours, I would just stay with that. Now, that being said, you might have to move bedtime a little bit so that she doesn't get overtired at the end of the day. So maybe bedtime moves up a little bit as well. So playing around with that as well. So there's not really a schedule. I am not one of those sleep consultants who's like, oh, 33 months. Oh, here's the schedule. Let me see. You should be waking up at 6, having your nap at 1, and going to sleep at 6. That's not how I work. Um, so, so I can't give you a specific schedule, unfortunately. You really have to still tune into your baby's cues and using those wake windows as a guideline. Okay. The other thing is that maybe that 6.5 hour wake window in the morning is too long for her. Maybe she needs a 6 hour wake window. Maybe you need to move that nap a little bit, right? So really watching her cues. What's happening at 1 o'clock, or what's happening when you try to put her down for a nap? Is it easy for her to get that nap? What is her mood when she wakes up from that nap after an hour, an hour and a half? Is she crying? Is she cranky? Then she's still tired and could have used more. If she's happy and content, then it's fine. That nap was all she needed. And then probably what's happening with not sleeping as well throughout the night is that she's actually overtired now by bedtime. So if that nap is shorter and you're still doing bedtime at 8:45, then she's already had a longer wake window. And so she's overtired, has more cortisol running through her body, which then means that she's not going to sleep well at night either. So playing around with all those different things that I mentioned. And keep asking your questions. So if that works or doesn't work, please post it in the group. Okay, and then the last question is Candace. Her son is 2.5, dropped his nap about a month ago, which is somewhat early, but okay, let's see. For the first couple of weeks, it made bedtime so much easier. He would go right to sleep and sleep 11 to 12 hours. On the days where he ends up falling asleep for any amount of time, bedtime takes over 2 hours. So I try to keep him awake during the day, even if he seems sleepy. But for the past couple of weeks, he's been waking up in the middle of the night. 3 to 4 nights a week, crying until we get him out of his crib and take him out of his room. He ends up being awake for hours, full of energy, no matter how boring we. Okay, so there's a few things going on here, and I think at 2.5 months, that's probably too young to have a full day of no rest periods. So I would still offer the nap. I would offer it in the middle of the day, even if it's 30 minutes. And then play around with bedtime to see, bedtime might be a little bit later. But even if it's 30-minute nap, and then actually what happens is, because you're seeing that he's sleepy during the day and you're not letting him decrease that sleep pressure, then he's actually overtired by bedtime, which is messing with his nighttime sleep. So that's part of it. We need to figure out how we can get him to manage the day without being overtired. So usually that is with a nap or an earlier bedtime. So playing around with an earlier bedtime also, like 5:30 or 6 even. But I would offer the nap. If the nap doesn't happen, then I would offer a rest period in the middle of the day. So, quiet reading in his room with him. Like, he's still too little to be expecting to do this on his own. So maybe you guys are just laying on the bed and you're quietly reading, or you're just hanging out and listening to music. There's like meditation apps for kids and stuff too. So you could listen to one of those just for like 20 or 30 minutes. So just like quiet, decreased stimulation is that point of that rest period. So that's what I would try. And then the waking up in the middle of the night, 3 to 4 nights a week crying. So that's probably coming from that overtiredness. But the other thing with the nap is that I would offer the nap every day. If it doesn't happen, offer the rest period. If the rest period happens, then I would move the bedtime up. If the nap happens, then you're going to have to play around with the timing of the bedtime. That might be a little bit later than it normally is. You'll kind of have to follow his cues. But also know that sometimes what happens, especially when they're in the transition of dropping a nap, is that some days they're like, nope, I do not want a nap. And then other days, so maybe there's like 3 days in a row where he's like, nope, I'm full of energy. I don't want a nap. And your instinct is like, oh, I guess he doesn't need the nap. But then on that fourth day, he really could have used that catch up sleep in the middle of the day. He would have napped. So we want to just be offering. And it might really be that 3 days in a row, he doesn't nap. And then he has that nap on the fourth day. And then another 3 days, he doesn't have that nap. And then he has that nap on the fourth day. It's also going to depend on what your activities are during the day. So that's what I would do first. Let me know if you need more support on that, asking more specific questions and telling us a little bit more about what you're trying at night to help him get back to sleep. Yeah. Okay. That was it. I am going back to my craniosacral therapy training in 10 minutes. So I wanted to just pop on here and answer those questions for this live for our April Q&A. So if you're not already inside the Sleep Deprived Mama group, then I hope that you come and join us. I have posted the link along with this video, and I hope that you come and join us and get your questions answered. So that's it for me, and I will see you guys all again soon. Bye for now.